Good evening. Welcome to Vitamae. I am your host, Mabel and Plechich. Today is July 1st, 2021. Our topic today is my story about being a cable technician for AT&T and Comcast in Illinois from 2000 to 2002. What does a cable technician do? A lot of it is supporting residential homes and installing cable TV, at least at that time, cable broadband, as well as residential telephony service. Those are the things that I did in the past. Initially, it was troubleshooting cable TV to make sure that you had service. That was an interesting profession, especially in a very cold winter season. That's when I started. It was around, I believe my training started around December 1999. I officially started in 2000 once I completed training. It was definitely a fun, I would say, challenging at the same time, physically heavy work for me. I'm only 5'1", to give you perspective. I was, a little petite lady here. Not too many take this profession for one. Mostly men do this type of job. But I wanted to do something technical. I was always a geeky person, very tomboy, technical, wanted to do something hands-on. I didn't want to be in the office working in customer service, so I chose to be a cable technician as my profession. The other pieces that you do when it comes to cable support is that you also provide end-user training. That's something, for example, how to use the remote, how to connect the TV to the cable box, make sure that at that time they had it was common to see picture-in-picture requests. What I found that was pretty funny and interesting at the same time is that they always thought that I knew everything about TV. There are many types of television. Some people have different media setups. They have a whole bunch of stereos. There's different things plugged in, DVDs or VHS at that point. Yes, we're going back. I usually looked for a manual in the first place to see how to troubleshoot it. Some of the odd troubleshooting requests that I had was they couldn't hear the volume, right? Or they see the picture, but they can't hear it. If you're anyone that likes to troubleshoot, and if you don't know the device, either you look at the manual or you press the buttons. And that was one of the funnier instances that I had for requests where they said they couldn't hear it, but they could see it. And I just went straight to the bottom of the television and just kept pressing buttons. It turned out one of the labels for the volume that was set for mute, it was already rubbed off, so they couldn't see it. So it was a very quick fix. Other cases, it was trying to mash the remote for the correct one. And you know those where you have a separate converter that you have a combination remote and one turns off, one goes off, whether it's your VHS, your television, or the cable box. They were unsynchronized for whatever reason. And some of the ones that usually became a recurring visit was for the elderly. It was a struggle for them. I even helped label some of it or help them put it in the same spot so they can figure out what their remotes are. The other things that you needed to learn, not only how to install, right, and troubleshoot, is figuring out whether you should service it inside or outside. That wasn't necessarily the easiest lesson to learn. I found out in time that, for example, if only one television was an issue or had issues outside of, let's say 3 or 4 televisions, then most likely you will have to troubleshoot inside. If I asked them, hey, is it all of your televisions that are having issues? Most likely it's outside. During the wintertime, the connections outside, they do get water inside, right? You have to waterproof it. And when it's snowing, it's icy, and then it melts during the spring, then it's sucked out, right? The connector, all it takes is water going in and not having a good connectivity. So I've had to replace ground blocks often. Or I would replace the cable itself, the cable run. That may be either underground, RG6, those are the thinner gauge cable, or RG11, those are the thicker gauge broadband cable, those are for longer distance. My common, or at least a very common request is when it's fuzzy, right? It's snowy, everything's bad for all TVs, then most likely those are the things that I had to fix. including rerun the cable, which is typically either eaten by squirrels, or if it's underground, the dogs like to bite it. It's low voltage. For whatever reason, they like gnawing on it. It feels good on their teeth. I don't know why they like doing that, or it's not buried low enough. So when people are gardening, they accidentally get to the cable. Typically, customers are told that if they are doing any digging, any yard work, they recommend to call so that, if they have issues, then make sure to rebury the cable or rerun the cable. So I've had to run many, many different cables. The other pieces that I also learned is that you just never know how cables are run. I found it funny and interesting at the same time that people thought that I could see or have x-ray vision. Most of the time, it was an educated guess, right? A lot of things you had to measure between the studs, or at least hope it is between the studs. You have to steer clear of utilities like gas, especially, or anything with electrical, especially if it's not grounded correctly. I've had peers of mine that had electric shock, touching the wrong pipe that happened to not be grounded well in the basement or somewhere else. The other piece is you just don't know where the cables are running. It may be different types of cables or qualities. We found splitters that split cables between the main feed to the different rooms or up to the attic or under the basement. They're usually cheap. You can tell because it's very light metal or aluminum or whatnot. It's not a heavy type metal. Usually those are not good quality for connectivity. Another thing that we use as troubleshooting is the actual Nextel phone. At that time, we didn't have the cellular service that we did now. We also used radio for communication in our trucks, for the cable trucks. If you clicked and pressed the button next to the TV, and if you see the television flicker, usually that means the connection is not tight. So you can see like the lines, right? Like it's flickering when you click the Nextel phone or anything that chirps. So that was easy to troubleshoot because you could see that there's a leakage. There's also a tool that we used at that time. It's like a meter, the dB. You had to measure and make sure it has the right power dB signal. So anybody familiar with low voltage type utilities, they would know what I'm referring to. There's a certain measurement that you have to have, so it's not causing overdrive or causing the your quality of your cable TV to either be snowy, not showing up at all, no signal, dead, right? Or just interruptions because signal is leaking. And if you didn't know this already, there are technicians out there that roam and check to see if there's a lot of leaking signal as part of the quality assurance. Also, for installation of cables, technicians usually they hire subcontractors for that. They just focus on installing. At that time, I've provided service calls, meaning after it was already installed by somebody else, I would be called for service calls to troubleshoot an existing service already. They're having trouble with anything to do with cable television. It actually surprised me how anyone else bigger than me navigated around some of these areas. There are times where I had to go to the attic and you have to go all the way to the inside of the corner of that roof to trace the cable. And it's, especially during the summer, it's ridiculously hot. And depending on the installation that they use, it's very itchy. It's the red insulation. You want to wear mask or even gloves, if depending on how sensitive you are. If you're germaphobe, it's even more challenging for you because it's a lot of dirt and a lot of dust. You don't know where the cable goes. It might be under the inside the closet. It could go through behind a refrigerator. It could be under another cabinet somewhere. It could go anywhere. You don't have a map to trace the cable. Your job as a technician is to assess and figure out every house. Every house is not the same. They're all different. And also the feed for the cable is not always in a easily accessible location. Sometimes it's underground. I've had to ask cable line technicians, the ones that have the bucket, you've seen them before, where they install fiber feeds or the higher, basically the main junctions, right? They're the ones that you see digging to get the main service locations. So if you've seen those green boxes, they're light green. If you didn't know, those are typically where some of the junctions are. You might even see a connection behind some underground where there's even water underneath it, and it's contained inside a plastic to let it float. And those are underground behind bushes. So it's almost like a treasure hunt. Depending on the subdivision, they allow it to be seen on top of the poles, right? Some locations, they prefer that the utility is not seen at all. So that's even more challenging. And depending on how far it is from the main feed, it could be all the way in the back or usually in the front. So just if you've never done cable, you appreciate it more when you've done it. I recommend that you take the opportunity to get that job. It gives you an appreciation of how the internet comes. That same cable or service provider not only gives cable television, now it also provided internet service. So the same cable could be cable television and internet. Separately from that, the telephone services came from the same main feed. Okay, and then I also did installation for telephony, and they used NIUs that they call that network interface unit devices. It's a voice over IP, converting the analog to digital. What I found interesting is that if you saw the rotary phones, if you recall it, they're four-prong connectors in the walls, and those are the heavy phones from like the classic movie you've seen. Those are analog. So if you had that plugged in and you're connecting a voice over IP type phone service, it would actually short it out. You can't mix it. So I ended up having to go around the house and unplug all those old classic telephones because you can't mix it. Another thing that's even more challenging when it comes to telephony service, it's not like the cable TV broadband or internet where it's a thick coaxial cable, right? It's RJ45, RJ3. It could be the very old tip and all black cable, just two of them, right? And they could be tied in punch blocks in different ways. It can look like a nest or web of different types of cable. I've seen that. There was one interesting house that I went to. It wasn't even that big. It was just almost like a shack. And it had 3-4 different types of telephony cable. You had all the standard like RJ45, the blue, white, green, white, brown, orange, white cables, right? Those are the ones that have the twist. But there were some that were only, I would say, red, black, green type cable, or completely black. And there were various types that you just twisted. And you needed to figure out, okay, is that line 1, line 2, line 3? If you didn't know it, there is a convention typically on cabling, line 1, line 2. So most technicians have that as a standard, right? Another thing that it was a common tool for us to use as a cable technician was the RJ45. I mean, not the wrench that we use, 716. That was a common one, right? We needed to make sure that we can exchange or change the port, like the connectors for your connection on the main drop itself. If you've seen the gauge or the thickness of the cable and the roll that it comes in, an RJ6 is bearable. You can carry it. But if it's an RJ11, it's almost the size of me, how big the wheel is that holds all that cable. So you would have found it almost laughable seeing me taking it out from the truck. The other challenge I faced, especially for my height, I'm only 5'1", was the truck needed to be lowered a little bit so I could reach the actual ladder, right? Thankfully, the ladder, there's like a little lever that drops it down enough so that I can take it off from the truck. But it was challenging to carry that 40-pound ladder. It wasn't easy. I had to not only take it off the truck, but maneuver, go around the homes. It could be around the garage area, by the fence. There were times where, it felt like an obstacle course. When I was younger, I did like jumping the fence. I was very active, an active child then. I was adventurous for sure. It was very beneficial that I was, because it felt like I needed that skill to be a cable technician, especially going to connect to the tap, the main feed. When you go to those feeds, it's not in a perfect spot, especially if there's snow, there's vines that may go around the actual utility pole. You might have a building, piles of stuff in there in a way that you can't just place the ladder in a simple position to get it lined up, and much less stable so that you don't fall. Not only do you need to position the ladder there, that typically you carry an actual belt with all your tools, with the connectors, the zip wrap, the tie wraps, anything that you need, waterproofing, um, and the cable attached that you're holding onto. You leave the cable reel down, right? You're not gonna carry that while going up the pole. So you leave that and you drag that cable, tie and hold on to it while you're climbing up. And then you have to wear that belt as part of safety. That's a required tool. That's part of OSHA as a safety. Once you get to the top of the pole and you reached it, you actually put the ladder, there's like a little hook on top of it so that it can hook into the metal. There's like a thin metal underneath the cable to keep it supported. If you never noticed it, that is actually necessary. Otherwise, you couldn't put a ladder and lay it on top of that, right? And what you'll also notice is if you're going to connect the cable, there's the power line as well on top of that. So you need to be careful that you're not going above or touching the power lines in there. There are other utility services, not just the cable type services on the lines itself. So that's something that you learn in the skills as you gain experience. They're not all the same. A lot of the utility poles vary in height and thickness. The ones that were the more challenging and scary at the same times were the ones that I couldn't put a ladder at all. It was too high, or there were vines that were wrapped around it, and I just couldn't put the ladder anywhere. That one of the scenarios I had to use a gaff. It's a metal, almost metal hook. You wrap it with leather, and it uses the shins as support, right? And to climb that, you have to put the bottom hook part of it that in a 45 angle. So that's the idea. If you're wearing a gaff, it's for both of your legs. You're going up, including using your safety belt around. So as you climb up that utility, you are stepping one foot at a time at 45 degrees and making sure that they're not slipping or falling. I've learned that you always secure at least 1 foot. So before you step and climb up, while you're adjusting your safety belt to stay in balance and sliding the ladder up as part of your support, you need to hook that gaff at 45 angle 1 foot at a time. There were times where I did get a very high point and realized that I dropped my tool, my 7/16 tool, and a connector or something else. And I had to do it over again. Go back down and go back up. I even had instances where I lost my tool because it was wintertime, and you can just imagine, having a 7/16 tool and then dropping it in the snow. It's hard to find, right? So it was definitely a very physically challenging type of role or job to have. I consider it a dirty job. You can definitely see places that you don't expect. For example, there are places where you can tell the smell is bad. There's a lot of pets. Hygiene is not there. People seem to forget that when you do service calls for cable, residential, really any type of utility service, that they may go behind your bed, under the bed, see things, I don't know, like clothes that you haven't put in the laundry, and really things that are personal to you. So don't be surprised when you're going for calling for services. Just be aware, right? That don't leave your laundry around or things that you don't want to see. You also learn how challenging it is to go between walls, especially if it's a house that was rebuilt many times. New buildings, especially new subdivisions, those tend to be easier. They're pretty standard, almost templatized. But if they have been renovated, some homes are, you can say, very classic homes, very nice homes, but they also added additional sections after the fact. and those become challenging. You need to learn about the drill bits that you use. You can't use the same type of drill bit for wood versus cement. If you use a cement type drill on a wood wall, then you may cause fire on it because it's the heat, right? You don't want to do that. You have to use certain for the nails or screws to match the type of wall material that you're using. I've had to go underneath the decks before. I definitely learned to fish cable. That was quite a adventure and interesting exercise to try to pull cable, fish cable through different corners to get to the point that you want to get to, whether it's to the front of the house, the back of your house, by the deck area, the bathroom even. There's just different ways to get to it. So typically what most customers do, the ones that can afford it, they hire electricians, preferably, that pre-run the cables for the different utilities, whether it's for the telephone service, even for their speakers and audio, television, you name it. Those are usually better. You want to have professional hired contractors that do that, so they can make sure that it's nice and neat, it's professionally done. They can spend the time to do it. Typically, as a cable technician, especially for service calls, we only have a certain period of time, and it's meant for troubleshooting, quick fixes just to get you up and running. At times, obviously, we replace cable, but that's usually the outside cable. We're not going to replace your TV or anything else, but the main feeds for your services, we do tend to replace. But as far as professional run cables, that's typically somebody that a service that does that as part of their day-to-day, almost, AV or electricians that do that professionally. Nothing more frustrating than when they hire and get those cable runs right into the main feed in their closets, wherever that is, utility areas, and they don't label it. It would be nice if they do it right and label it so that you don't have to go through the process of hunting down or tracing the cable, but that does happen. So we do have toners for that to figure out where it ends. But it's definitely ideal if they run cables that they label it correctly, whether it's going to the living room, to the kitchen, you name it. It is important. Otherwise, it's a hunting type area, right? As a technician, you also need to be good at estimating where you're going to drill. You can't just drill a hole without measuring twice, if not more, so you know where it's going to end, right? I don't think anyone wants to see a hole in the wrong side of the air, much less in the ceiling where you can see it, right? So, and that has happened. We've had, sadly, some folks that weren't paying attention and they kept drilling the hole, in the ceiling, and it's in the living room and you can see it and it's in the wrong spot. Thankfully, one of our coworkers at that time called out that peer and said, "Why are you making that many holes to drill for this? It's going the wrong way." So you can say there are moments of bloopers and accidental activities there. I've definitely had moments where, especially during the winter time, where you're crossing the area to the house and you don't realize that the ditch is deep, right, with the snow on top. I'm carrying a 40-pound ladder. I could barely carry it as it is. Have all my equipment, and I ended up just dropping and sinking in a ditch because I didn't know that it was covered by a lot of snow. At that time, we did not have GPS. So today, I consider it an advantage for you that you have GPS today. I wish I had GPS then. I remember having to make the map, recreate the streets. They weren't always straight north, south, east, west. Depending on the subdivision, you learn that based on the numbering, and that's how I learned to figure out the streets, right? Those are nice setups when they have numbers going north, south, east, west. That makes it easy. But many subdivisions have it where it's like a snake. It goes around. You can see the house straight ahead, but you can't go straight to it because you have to go around in waves, right? What's interesting is when you don't have names to the street and they're brand new, it's not even named at all. And sometimes they make it like a shoe horse almost. It's like a U. And it's the same number on one side, it's the same on the other side. I've gotten lost before where I had to call the customer and I'm asking where are they at. And somehow I always ended up on the wrong left or right side of the subdivision because it was the exact same number. Other times, it's I've had to ask the police or even pull them over just so I could find a location. That's how desperate I was sometimes, to ask the police because they know the area. Why not ask the police, right? Um, I also could not forget the people that I worked with. There are many interesting folks that I worked with as a cable technician. Amazing people. Some of them were, you can't make it up. They're just hilarious. They have interesting personalities that you never forget and have left an impression for me for life. Even though it was a hard job for me, it's one of my favorite jobs because it introduced me to working by myself, right? The truck was your office. It was a moving office. You had all the tools in there and you had to make sure it was stocked with all the equipment that you have, especially to service a job. Typically, we were given about 10 to 12 different routes. That's what they call it. And depending on what the customers asked, they have a 2-3 hour range or 4 hours or even all day, depending on the customer, what they choose if there's no time constraints. So 10 to 12 jobs is a lot, depending on the area you're covering. I've definitely covered a lot of the northeast or northwest side of the Illinois near Chicago area subdivision, more like in Gurnee, Waukegan, Antioch, Deerfield, Highland Park, those and Riverside. Those are the areas that I covered in Illinois. And if you know about Illinois, there's definitely winter, crazy weather, and heat waves, right? It was not fun during the very heavy snow or rainy days, especially. And some of the services that we needed to make was across main streets. At those incidents, then we asked for help for additional technicians because it was just such a long run and it was dangerous to just do it by yourself. It was faster to get at least 2 or 3 other people to help you make the runs. So it's a very enlightening job. I definitely appreciated it. I had a whole lot of fun learning it. It wasn't a straightforward, you knew it, right? When you get the training, you do have at least a few weeks or so before starting the job. And you also get to learn how much effort it is to get your service. We call it layer 1. It starts there. Anyone that has internet now, you probably appreciate that today. That's where it comes from, right? From the ISPs. We provided that and we supported it. I became a technical support specialist after that, after being a technician for at least 2 years. But I definitely respect that job. I appreciate it. I recommend that you get into it, at least, have an understanding of what it is. Before I did that job, I had no idea what those other boxes are that you saw outside your homes. The green boxes, you've seen it, right? Or manholes. Sometimes they're in the manholes. It's hard to describe the experience until you do it. Your eyes get opened up and you see how cables run. So now, today, I appreciate cable in general. If I ever make my own house or at least design it, I will definitely do my very best to make sure that the utilities are where it should be, that you have enough cable ports for whatever services that you need. You just appreciate that. And even when you're walking around, you realize why those cables are on top of the poles, right? What they're for. Nobody can live without it nowadays, especially when we're very dependent on internet. You appreciate it more. At that time, that's when I also realized, or at least was introduced to Cisco switches and routers. ISPs use that, right? There's different types of network devices out there, different vendors, Juniper, you name it. But Cisco was predominantly used, at least for that. At that time, it was AT&T. It became Comcast, and I definitely learned a lot when it came to troubleshooting the physical layer. It's a very external type work, very physical or weather season type work. So you realize how much harder it is to do anything. You have to plan and put more time. And it's not just the weather you have to deal with. My favorite part was, from being a cable technician, was all the fur babies. For whatever reason, many of the dogs or pets were the first to greet me. So when I walked in a driveway to greet or start my troubleshooting service, the dogs were the first to greet me. Um, they were very happy to see me, just to give them attention. One time, I don't know if that was a moment for all those dogs to just follow me. I was like a Pied Piper almost. I saw a lot of dogs chasing my truck, just following me. They knew I wasn't afraid of dogs. I do like animals myself. It's good and bad. I can easily say that because I did do disconnects as well. It wasn't just me providing service or troubleshooting it. I also had to do disconnects. There were orders where I had to do that if you didn't pay long enough, whether it's one resident or even a whole apartment complex, right? Uh, the dogs were actually very welcoming. I was doing a disconnect for this home, and by the time I stepped around, the dog was just right there. Technically, they could have bit me if they wanted to, but they sensed that I wasn't really afraid of them. One thing you should know when you're doing this job is definitely not be afraid of dogs, because they can smell that a mile away. I had a coworker where he was very afraid of dogs, and I could not get my job done. I was actually giving training, and because of his fear of the dog could smell it, and she kept barking. I couldn't get my job done until I told my trainee to just go stay in the car, or at least go in a truck. That's one thing you do learn, is not just people, but also the animals that you see. At that time, my husband, we weren't together yet. He had a customer where they had a snake, a python of all things. He saw this little aquarium, or it wasn't small actually, it was a big type of aquarium for containing the snake. And it looked like a little snake, and he's like, "Oh, it's a cute little snake." And the customer goes, "Well, wait till you see the mom." And he goes, "Where's the mom?" "Oh, she's just right there in the living room." So you'll also learn that people do collect exotic animals there. It's not just dogs, cats. They might have snakes in there, or alligators or crocodiles or other exotic animals. One of the houses that I saw, they were collecting or breeding mini pit bulls, but it wasn't the greatest house because that was another reason why I call it a dirty job. Is some people, I don't think they should even be allowed to shelter these animals. They were packed in a cage. They didn't even have a carpet in the living room anymore. It was stuff of poops everywhere. So hygiene is definitely questionable for some homes. Looks are deceiving. It may look nice inside, but as you go in, they might not be what you expect. So expect to be surprised, and expect to see unexpected moments either. Some people thought that having the cable box, having it connected to the cable is enough. They forgot that they also need the power for it to be turned on. There were also times where I really felt bad and sad for some people, especially for the retirement homes. Some of the elderly ladies and wanted to just have somebody for company because they don't see their children enough. Many times I would try to help them and also spend a few moments with them. They would make coffee. They would even bake brownies and cakes and food just so that you would stay. So I felt bad, and I would be teary by the time I got out, just trying to keep company. I also met amazing people out there during the wintertime again, where I got stuck. I couldn't get out from the dead end area. The trucks that we have were front wheel, right? And I didn't have a sandbag. I didn't have salt to melt the ice, or even a shovel. I wish I had a shovel. I was picking through the ice because it was just stuck. I couldn't move. And this one lady saw me stuck in there just doing my diligence, trying to get myself out of that position. And she goes, "You don't have a, like leg warmer." So she gave me a leg warmer. She didn't know me. She just gave me that, even gave me tea just so I could warm up. So there are many sweet people out there. So don't underestimate your presence and what impact you might have especially when you're working outside in customer service. This is why I'm very customer service focused, is because I believe in, you know, doing the very best to take care of your customer. This just gives you a little insight of what I've done. I don't want to make the story too long. I do appreciate that job. I'll never forget it, especially the people that I met in there. They came from all backgrounds like myself. Many people from the police, from the military background, from really all sorts of life. Um, they're all interesting personalities. I love the jokes and the comedy that they gave me. I appreciated the humor that they gave me. Needless to say, I was picked on a lot. Yes, I was the shortest person in the group and the only female of all things. It's not a job that many women take. There was another lady that worked the residential telephony, and she worked for AT&T at that time. I was at that time Comcast by the time they converted. So me and her would occasionally see each other as we were completing the routes. The only two ladies in the entire area of that region to service customers. I'll end it with the last thing. When I started, they didn't have any uniform for us yet. It was, we were wearing jeans, a shirt, gave us a tool, gave us a truck. And the first time that they saw me, they're like, where's the other guy? Or, are you sure you can do this job? So it definitely left a awkward impression for me in the beginning, because they didn't expect a lady like myself to actually service the job. But I did build my reputation through hard work and learning the craft. It was quite a learning lesson. And then I also ended up training other people, right? So if I can do it, and if you pursue it, you can certainly do it. Me carrying heavy things, people ask, how did you do it? I didn't think too hard about it. I just did it. And at times I can easily say it was out of anger and frustration because it was heavy. Like I said, it's a physically demanding job. So I used it as a vehicle by giving myself strength to lift things that are heavier than usual. That may have, it almost seems like a superpower. When you're determined enough to do something, you can do the job, even if it's physically hard for you to do. So just keep that in mind. I'm giving you that as a little insight of what I learned. That was a long time ago. So telephony and voice have been in my system for a long time. Technology has always been my forte. I love tinkering with technology. I like seeing it work, right? Give people what they need. I enjoy it, and I like to learn more about it. So just want to make sure you got a little bit of a perspective of my side of the story and where it began, especially when it came to networking. That early on, I was actually working on my CCNA certification for networking at that time, before I became a consultant later on in 2007. So it is definitely became one of my stepping stones to get to where I'm at today. And it's a memorable, life and chapter that I had in the past that I will cherish. And hopefully it's something that you can appreciate. So have a good night, everyone. I hope that you have interesting stories that you also want to share or can relate to what I have. So have a wonderful night.